Very strange and unique faction introduced in the new game Elden Ring, consisting of what appears to be prawns and centipedes, who use glaives and impossible to dodge pest threat attacks to take you out. Most players will first run afoul of these things, likely when they open a trapped chest and end up in a cave in the middle of the swamp of Aeonia, which at first can really seem hard to escape, but it's not too hard after you figure it out. Just gotta outrun those damn pest threads. Anyway, we're not really introduced to the group until we meet the Sage Gowry, who sort of resembles one of the sealers of New Londo back in the old Dark Souls days, just minus the mask. He's the first and only member of the Servants of Rot we actually meet proper. Now, he tells us to go fetch a broken needle from some guy in the middle of the swamp and bring it back to him, and that we'd be saving a young girl's life if we helped him. Says he's been waiting for someone of our ilk for some time. Which, all of it seems rather suspicious, especially because it's a shady old man who's living in a shack in the middle of fucking Chernobyl via Scarlet Rot. And there's a giant fucking T-Rex looking dog sitting out in front of his place. Now, you can trust this dude or you cannot trust him. But neither is, particularly required for going through this quest. Before we get into the details of Millicent's quest, however, we should probably understand the Servants of Rot a bit more. Now, from the description of their glaive, it says, though men might recognize the keen intellect of the pests evidenced by this spear's uncanny design, it will never be understood by them. Now that tells us that they're very deceptively intelligent. Now they might look like a bunch of dumb bugs, but they're actually pretty smart and they have beliefs and they're very sentient beings. Other than that, we don't learn much other than that, normal men will never understand them, which is a rather interesting bit of lore. Sort of reminiscent of the Reapers back in Mass Effect and how their motives and things are unknowable by mere men. Next up, we have the famous Poison Mist returning from previous titles. This time it's an incantation of the Servants of Rot. It says it releases poisonous mist before the caster. This can be cast while in motion. Those who dwell within poison know rot all too well, the death that begets life, that comes to all equally. That is to say, it is the cycle of rebirth put into practice. Now, the last bit about the cycle of rebirth is sort of a reoccurring theme when it comes to the pests or servants of rot, as they'd probably prefer to be called. Everything rots away and is reborn stronger. Now, this may seem a bit reminiscent of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC from Dark Souls 3, where a big part of it is how the world is rotting away and find yourself a good rotting bed to lie on and all that from the Corvian. However, their worship of the rot seems to have something to do with Malenia's Scarlet Bloom or Scarlet Aeonia ability, which states, each time the scarlet flower blooms, Malenia's rot advances. It has bloomed twice already. With the third bloom, she will become a true goddess. Now, and I believe the first time the flower bloomed was in her fight against Radon, which nuked the entire region of Caelid and sent the powerful Chad General wandering mad for all eternity through those wastelands with this poor fucking malnourished horse. And the second bloom would be probably in our fight with her, when halfway through it we essentially kill her and she's reborn as the Rock Goddess. Now that would leave one more time for her to be reborn as a true goddess, which we have been yet to see unless it appears in some sort of DLC. It just sort of sets her up that she's not really gone completely yet, sort of like Radon and Alexander's Bowl. Now back to the pest. These really interesting specimens can be found all over the place when it comes to Caelid. They're found wandering and patrolling the streets, inside caves, but outside of that, they can be found in the Lake of Rot, which is a secret area you find later on in the game, and they seem to be worshipping something at this grand cloister, likely worshipping Malenia in some form at this location. In a scene straight out of Temple of Doom, it makes sense that they'd be here worshipping somewhere where there's such a high concentration of the rot. Although it is curious to wonder what these servants of rot and what their religion has to do with the being Estelle, which is locked away beneath the Lake of Rot. I can't really find any correlation between the two of them other than that he was possibly imprisoned down there, hidden away for, whoever the fuck knows how long. I'm going to be researching the Estelles and the Falling Star Beasts and probably make a video on them at some point in the future, but as for now, Now, coming back to Gowry and Millicent's questline, where we learn a lot more about these guys. Now, after retrieving the needle from the heart of Aeonia, you bring it back to Gowry, who then repairs it, and asks you to deliver it to Millicent herself after he tells you the secret of Celia and all that. So you track her down to this church where she's guarded by 2 more of these servants of rot, and you give her the needle. And she takes it. She says, any chance to stave off the infection. If you go refresh at the grace, you come back, it'll appear that she's severed one of her arms off as well. And from here, the quest progresses that you return to Gowry's shack and find him gone, but Millicent there, saying she remembered some faint bit of memory about the place, which runs contrary to what Gowry himself said, that she would likely have no memory of him or this place. And, refreshing out of grace and returning shows Gowry there, and you can ask him why he didn't, say hi to Millicent. He said her seeing him would only hold her back, and that the best thing, the old could do for the young is to be forgotten. Now, this seems like, a melancholy take, but, later on we learned that, he has ulterior motives for this. Millicent herself tells us she's going to strike out on a journey to basically figure out, who she is and figure out why she exists and all that. She goes on this whole long soul-searching journey where you encounter her at several points. At one point, you even help her obtain a prosthesis, so she's very similar to Malenia in the regards that she wears the robotic arm. You obtain it from the Shaded Fortress. It's guarded by a lone Clean Rot Knight who... we're going to talk a little bit about the Clean Rot Knights because, I believe the golden alloy armor or the unalloyed gold armor in some way or another is supposed to repel Scarlet Rot. Obviously, it's not a for sure, way of repelling it as we've seen, but it's supposed to at least maybe ward off, or at least they believed possibly that it did. But moving on. After giving Millicent her new arm, you can encounter her at various places, and she'll offer assistance in battle in return for you helping her. And at one point after this, you can return to Gowry, who will then have a new incantation for Cell, one called Pest Threads, which is very similar to the undodgeable threads that the Servants of Rot send at you in the tunnels and all that. The description for Pest Threads reads... Incantation of the Servants of Rot. Secretes countless sticky threads, launching them forwards. A technique of the pale pests who crawl through the lands afflicted by scarlet rot, the abandoned children of the goddess. Do you have an interest in rot incantations, it says at the bottom? There's a little bit to unpack in that description, namely that they were abandoned. Now this references the fact that Malenia is gone, or, she's not known, no one knows where she is. Now, she was actually carried by a Clean Rot Knight named Finley, all the way to the Halig Tree, and this knight was rewarded with a royal burial and all that. But she's essentially abandoned her subjects, at least in their eyes, which is something we're going to talk about when we get into more of Gowry's motivations, and how he's sort of going against the will of the Servants of Rot, possibly seeing them as weak and pushovers after so many years of just waiting for an abandoned god who isn't going to come back for them. Again, it's all just theory in this video anyway. Another interesting point is how before you obviously buy the rot incantation, when you return after telling him that you gave her the prosthesis, he says directly that Malenia is her mother. Now, I don't know if this is the same in the Japanese translation. I know a lot of things can be lost in translation, so to speak. So I don't know if this directly means she's her mother in any way. We know that she, is possibly some relation to her. Even, herself later saying she doesn't know what relation she has to Malenia, but he directly says here mother. Now I don't know if that is a mistranslation or if that was intentional, but it's definitely worth noting. This is also the first time Gowry makes reference to Millicent's sisters, who we are sure to meet down the road, and also the first time he refers to her as a bud, green and underdeveloped, which again is a bit of foreshadowing with the whole scarlet bloom and all that stuff. Not even really, it's just explicitly stating. At this point, Gowry also offers a bit of dialogue about Malenia herself and about how she was born of Radagon and Marika and how she was cursed with the Scarlet Rot. Gowry also describes to the player what an empyrean is and how they're no mere demigod but someone born of 2 gods, so the next true god essentially. He also states that ever since she fought Radon and blossomed that flower that turned all of Caelid into a red wasteland, he's dedicated himself to her. And he also makes another reference to that cycle of rebirth and how rot represents the cycle of rot and rebirth, which is again a reoccurring theme when it comes to these guys. Now back to Millicent. After running into her a few times, namely at the Dominilla village and the mountaintops of giants, she'll eventually tell you what her goal is, that she's tracking down Malenia and she believes her to be beyond the Erd tree. The next time we see her after this, though, will be at the prayer room at the Halig tree, where she will finally tell us she believes herself to be of some relation to Malenia, as we've already stated, and learned from Gowry, and that she wishes to return her will, or her sense of self, her ability to resist the scarlet rot, which she believes she possesses. And it's a very interesting thing, because it basically suggests that, maybe perhaps a piece of Malenia, like maybe one of her limbs, was severed off, and Gowry found it, and he's been kind of cultivating it into a daughter with all kinds of magic or incantations, possibly. It reminds me of the shards of Manus from Dark Souls. Now, in Dark Souls 1 in the DLC, well, not really a guy, but a big monster called Manus. Now, in Dark Souls 2, bits and shards of Manus, and in Dark Souls 3, I believe there's a theory that one of them has made it even to Dark Souls 3, but there's bits of him that have survived and gone on to, in most situations, just cause chaos and misery and darkness. And they represent different aspects of him. Like there's his fear, his courage, his, etc., the what have you. And this seems maybe similar to that, as we learn that she has sisters. And at this point, we can then return to Gowry, who will have a little bit of more dialogue about Millicent finding herself and her following in the footsteps of her mother. Again, referencing the fact that Malenia is likely her mother in some way or form, possibly in the way that I stated, or maybe quite literally is her mother, and that she was an actual child. Now, after defeating the ulcerated, or I believe putrid, tree spirit that is at the mini lake of rot down beneath the Halig tree, returning will show us two summon signs, one red and one golden. Now, the red one allows us to invade Millicent, and the other one allows us to help her. To fight off what? We'll find out here in a second. Now, at this point, we can return to Gowry, who will be sobbing. You can ask him why he's sobbing, and he says he has to soon say goodbye to Millicent, and that she'd soon meet her sisters and be defeated, and then blossom into what she's supposed to be, a Scarlet Valkyrie. It is at this point Gowry's goals start to become a little more clear. He asks that you help her sisters kill her. Interestingly enough, he says you must be the one to lay the final blow, as it must be she must taste the sweet taste of betrayal, adding that the betrayal will make her flower bloom most vividly, and that when Malenia dies and blooms the third time and ascends godhood, that Millicent too will be reborn as a Scarlet Valkyrie, and a sort of like a new demigod type of figure in her own right. Now, if you go through with this and you actually help her sisters, this is true. This pretty much happens. She will ascend when Malenia blooms the third time. She will ascend as a Scarlet Valkyrie. Now, if you don't, things get a bit different. You get a little bit of different dialogue, and also a completely different item too, with completely different effects. Now, going this route nets you the prosthesis wearer emblem, part of the golden prosthesis used by Millicent. The hand is locked into a fist that once raised a sword aloft, boosts dexterity and raises attack power with successive hits. The despair of sweet betrayal transformed Millicent from a mere bud into a magnificent flower, and one day she will be reborn as a beautiful Scarlet Valkyrie. A direct quote from Gowry himself, pretty much. And this pretty much confirms that she will one day return as a Scarlet Valkyrie if we go this route. Taking the other route is a bit harder, but probably respects Millicent's actual wishes a bit more. In this instance, you help her fight off all of her sisters, and she takes the needle out on her own, and thanks you for allowing her to live as herself, even if it was in passing. She warns you that soon she won't be much more than just a lump of rot-infested flesh, and to get clear of her. And if you go this route, when you return, she's gone, and she nets you the unalloyed gold needle, which you originally gave her. Now, this can be used at Malenia's arena and turned into Michaela's needle, and at that point, you could take it to Placidusax's arena and undo a Flame of Frenzy ending if you ended up with one, which is pretty helpful if you felt like you were stuck in that. I imagine everybody knows all that by now. Anyways, it's also interesting to note that this route, Millicent appears to have some idea of what's going on. She knows that that you were put up to this by someone. Possibly she knew all this was her goal at some point before the rot took that bit of her memory away. It's possible that when she saw her sisters, a lot of it came flooding back. It's really tough to say. But by the end, she knew what was going on, and she wanted to go on her own terms. She didn't want to be reborn as something other than herself. She wanted to die with her sense of self. Now, I suppose now this is where we could get into what she exactly was. Like I've already suggested that she was maybe a piece of Malenia that gained sentience, similar to like how Sun Wukong can make a piece of his hair sentient. But it's really just all theory at this point, because we don't really have a concrete answer. We just know that he raised all these girls in the swamp, and he raised 4 of them that he knew would never be goddesses or never be Scarlet Valkyries. He knew that they would play a part in creating 1 out of the 5. And he knew, I guess he always knew it was going to be Millicent, or perhaps he had a particular fondness for Millicent, that he wanted it to be her that descended to be a Scarlet Valkyrie. It's really tough to say. Now, what I mentioned earlier about Gowry possibly going against what the other servants of Rot wanted is they don't seem to be taking any direct action in anything. They just seem to be awaiting their goddess's return, and Gowry is essentially trying to bring in a demigod who could effectively be their tangible god, while Malenia herself ascends into whatever the next iteration of the Erd Tree is to be the next true god and replace Marika. At least that's what he's trying to make happen. So going the route in which you help the sisters kill Millicent, basically at some point in the future, that bud in Malenia's arena will bloom and blossom, and Millicent will be reborn as some type of Scarlet Valkyrie, who then walks, the lands between, and is able to be a god to the servants of Rot, or be some type of religious figure to them, some holy figure. Returning to Gowry, though, if you didn't help the sisters, shows something interesting. He's once again sobbing. This time he's cursing both Malenia and Millicent for spurning him and the servants of Rot. So he asks, why do you detest us so much? Now this suggests that he possibly believes Malenia abandoned them on purpose, just as Millicent did, but he seems to not understand that in Millicent's case, she didn't want a destiny that was forced upon her. She just wanted to live as her own person, and not as some weird sort of surrogate god for him and his religious buddies. And that's pretty understandable from her point of view. I mean, there's just him and a bunch of goddamn centipede dudes with spears. You can't really, not exactly a great crowd. Plus, the man sent her sisters after her to kill her, specifically to turn her into this god against her will. It's a whole thing, like as we've gone over. But Gowry was essentially trying to bring about the birth of a new demigod type thing for him and his buddies to worship, and it either failed or succeeded depending on the choices the player makes. It could be seen as similar to how Ranni, the witch, uses the player to bring about the Age of Stars, sort of like a micro version of that, as Gowry himself is manipulating somebody, Millicent, and it becoming something that they don't want or even fully understand, and possibly, to usher in some type of Age of Scarlet Rot when Malenia returns. Now, I'd say it's pretty similar to Ranni's questline and her manipulating the player into becoming the Elden Lord of Stars and bringing about the Age of Stars that no one really understands yet. But again, that's all up to the player's choice and all that. Now, with the quest, I think there's enough in the quest for us to come to our own conclusions about Gowry, Millicent, and even Malenia. It's all up to the player's decisions to decide who did what, or even, we can only do so much with the information we're given. But I hope this video about the servants of Rot and Millicent and Gowry was at least partially informative. The next one will probably be about the arcane spear faces. And I don't know, if you liked it, please consider leaving a like or even a subscribe. It would really help. I appreciate it. Any suggestions, feel free to suggest stuff in the comments. Anything I missed, feel free to comment, please. I encourage it. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.
Millicent, my daughter, why would you take out the needle? You were so close, so very close, to becoming the fairest of all flowers. Would you disown us, too, as your mother did? We, children of the scarlet rot. Millicent, Malenia, do you detest us so utterly?